Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at Brian Tracy's $1,000,000 Habits. And you've probably heard of him. He's that guy who went from like labor to a sales expert and then kind of this success guru. This
Yeah.
book is like full of all these universal principles that he's seen along the way.
What's interesting about Tracy is he doesn't just tell you the habits, he lays out a foundation. Like he explains why, and he calls these laws, right?
Yeah.
The rules of the game for success.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What are these laws? How can they help someone like me who's maybe feeling a bit stuck?
Well, he starts out with the law of control. That's about, how much control do you feel you have in your life, right? It's connected to this thing in psychology called locus of control.
Oh, yeah.
Some people have an internal locus where they believe they're driving the car, and others have an external locus where they feel like they're just a passenger.
Right. I can see how that mindset shift could be huge. If you're stuck, it's easy to think things are just happening to you. But if you believe you have control, you're more likely to take action.
Absolutely. And then take this. Imagine you've got a ton of work, you're dreading it. That's where the law of attraction comes in, like attracts like. By focusing on that dread, you're drawing in that negativity.
Oh, okay. That's kind of freaky, but it makes sense. I have definitely been in those procrastination cycles where if you just keep thinking about the negative, it gets worse. What's the antidote to that?
Well, Tracy would say you've got to shift your beliefs. This is the law of belief in action. If you believe you can handle it, you'll approach it differently. Your energy changes. You get different outcomes.
Makes sense, but like, what about those times where it feels like external factors are holding you back? Like, no matter how positive you try to be.
That's a really good question. It's not about ignoring reality or the limitations that are there, right? It's that you recognize that even in that situation, you have choices.
Mm.
And those choices are influenced by your beliefs.
So it's like choosing to focus on the things you can control, even when everything else feels chaotic.
Yeah, that's it. And that leads us to the law of expectation. This is all about self-fulfilling prophecies. If you expect to succeed, you act in a way that makes success more likely. If you expect to fail, well.
You're probably going to. Let's not go there.
Yeah.
But I see how your expectations shape things. If I believe I'm going to nail this presentation, I'll prepare differently than if I think it'll be a disaster.
Exactly. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Think back to that pile of work we were talking about. The law of correspondence suggests that your outer world, the messy desk, the unfinished project, is a reflection of what's going on inside.
So if I'm feeling overwhelmed on the inside, it's going to show up in my physical space.
That's the idea. But the good news is, if you can change the inner world, the thoughts, the beliefs, even the habits, you can start to change what's happening outside too.
That's powerful. And that leads us to the law of habits. So this is where Tracy gets into the practical steps for making those changes, right?
Absolutely. The law of habit reminds us that any habit, procrastination, productivity, anything can be learned or unlearned. You're not stuck with your old patterns.
So even if I've been stuck in a rut for a while, I can break free just by changing my habits.
You got it. That's the core message. You have the power to create the life you want. The key is consistent action, even when it's not easy.
I see how all these laws connect. It's not just about thinking positive thoughts. It's realizing the link between our thoughts, our beliefs, what we do, and what actually happens.
Exactly. And we've only just scratched the surface. Tracy's got all these $1,000,000 habits that give us a framework for putting these laws into action.
I cannot wait to dig into that. But before we do, I want to hear from you, listener. Which one of these laws resonates with you most right now? What are you facing that these laws might help you with? Hold that thought. We'll be back in a flash to explore Tracy's habits for success. Okay, so we've got these laws down. What about the actual habits? I have to admit, when I hear $1,000,000 habits, my mind goes straight to money.
That's a natural first thought. And Tracy does cover financial habits, but he actually starts somewhere else, setting yourself up for success more broadly. And the very first thing is goal setting.
Gotcha. Now, I'm all for vision boards and having a sense of where I want to go, but writing them down every single day, is that really necessary?
Tracy says absolutely. He even mentions this study. Only 3% of adults actually write down their goals, but they achieve way more than everyone else. It's like by writing it down, you're activating those laws of expectation and attraction. It tells your subconscious, hey, this is what we're focusing on.
So it's like giving your brain a target, not just vague ideas, but a clear focus on what you want.
Exactly. And not just any goals. He says, go for the top 10% in your field. He calls this excellence orientation. Basically, a commitment to learning and growing all the time.
Okay, now that sounds a little intimidating. How do you even figure out who the top 10% are in your field? Are we talking like specific metrics or people you look up to? What's the benchmark here?
Well, Tracy says, look for the people who are getting those extraordinary results, the ones who are setting the standards, the innovators, the thought leaders, even the people who are maybe quieter but are excelling in their own way.
So find those people who inspire you to level up your game, basically. I like that. But it sounds like a lot of work to actually achieve excellence.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
But think about it like physical exercise. You don't get in shape just going to the gym once in a while. You have to put in the effort consistently. Same thing with mental fitness. You've got to push yourself, keep learning.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know Tracy's big on that whole continuous learning thing. He's got that 1000% formula, right?
Yes. He says you should try to improve your productivity by just a tiny bit each day, like 110th of 1% through focused learning. It sounds small, but over time, it adds up.
Right, it compounds. He also says that just 30 minutes of reading a day can turn you into an expert over a few years.
Exactly. Consistency is key. And he's got some pretty amazing stories in the book about people who transform their careers just by making time to read.
It makes it seem a lot more doable, right? Not some impossible feat. Okay, so we've got goal setting, excellence, learning. Now let's get to those money habits we talked about earlier. What's the first step?
Pay yourself first. That's the foundational principle.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Is it really just as simple as setting aside 10% of your income before you even touch it?
That's the gist, yeah. Prioritize your future self. Don't spend everything you make. But Tracy takes it up a notch with his wedge theory.
Wedge theory. What's that all about?
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. He says you should save 50% of all future income increases. So like you get a raise, half of it goes straight to savings.
Wow, 50%. That's pretty intense. But I can see how that would really add up fast. It's like forcing your savings to grow.
Exactly. And it keeps you from lifestyle inflation. You get more money and suddenly your spending goes up too. He's also big on the idea of long-term thinking when it comes to investing.
So no get-rich-quick schemes for Brian Tracy.
Nope, not at all. He's all about doing your research, being thorough before you put your money into anything. Know the risks, have a plan, and be patient.
So build wealth strategically, make it sustainable. That's much better than chasing fads, for sure. Okay, we've covered goals, excellence, lifelong learning, and finances. What else is in this $1,000,000 Habits playbook? What about work and relationships and all that?
Well, no matter what your job is, your approach to work and the people you work with, that makes a huge difference. Tracy has a whole section on what he calls career habits.
Yeah, it makes sense. We spend so much time working. Those habits really matter. What are some of the big takeaways for navigating the workplace and doing it well? Okay, so career habits. What does Tracy say for those of us who want to, not just get by at work, but really excel?
One of the biggest things for him is focus on contribution. Basically, figure out the core value you bring to your company, your clients, whoever, and then always look for ways to add more value.
So it's not enough to just show up and do the bare minimum. You've got to be proactive. Look for opportunities to really go above and beyond.
Exactly. And then he talks about action orientation. Be the person who gets things done. He actually tells this story about how he got promoted early on in his career. He would just volunteer for any task that was like a challenge, and he'd nail it every time. Just prove himself to be super reliable.
Love that. Sometimes you got to create your own opportunities, right? Don't wait for someone to give you permission. Just show them what you can do.
That's it. But even though individual initiative is so important, he also really emphasizes being a team player. He's all about treating everyone like a customer, your colleagues, your boss, everyone.
So create a culture of respect, of support. Like you're not just serving the external customers, you're serving your teammates too.
Exactly. Now, Tracy doesn't just stop at career advice. He knows that, success in one area of life kind of bleeds into others. So he's got this whole section on relationship habits, and he starts with something that seems simple, but it can be really powerful.
I'm going to guess the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated.
You got it. It sounds basic, but think about it. So many problems come from forgetting that. And it's more than just being polite. Tracy talks about practicing acceptance, having unconditional positive regard for people, even when they're driving you nuts.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one, especially if you're dealing with someone who's difficult. Does he have, practical tips for actually doing that?
He talks about focusing on people's good qualities, expressing appreciation, little things like that can go a long way. But he also recognizes that sometimes relationships take some real work. Forgiveness, for example.
He uses that analogy of the damaged car, right? Like, if you're holding on to resentment, it's like refusing to fix a flat tire. You're just stuck. But forgiveness is hard. What does he say for those times when it feels impossible?
He says, focus on what you can control, your own thoughts, your reactions. Don't dwell on the past or try to change the other person. And sometimes forgiveness is more about letting go of the anger you're carrying rather than condoning what they did.
Right. That's a good distinction. And it goes back to that law of control we talked about earlier. You can't control what other people do, but you can choose how you respond.
Exactly. And speaking of things you can control, Tracy's a big believer in making time for those who really matter. He tells this story about a dad and daughter who, reconnect on a road trip. Nothing fancy, just spending time together. It's about that face-to-face connection.
I love that story. It reminds you that quality time doesn't have to be like a big production. Sometimes the simple moments are the most meaningful. So we've covered finances, careers, relationships. Last piece of the puzzle, I'm betting it's health.
You got it. Tracy's a big believer in physical well-being. He talks about weight management, and he really emphasizes making gradual changes, not those quick fix things.
He hates those fad diets, right? Didn't he talk about the dangers of, what were they, the three white poisons?
Salt, sugar, and white flour. Yep, he goes into detail about how those affect your energy and your overall health. But he also says it's important to find some kind of exercise you actually enjoy.
Right, it has to be sustainable. If you hate it, you won't stick with it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And of course, he talks about getting enough sleep. 7 or 8 hours is his recommendation.
So it's about creating a whole lifestyle that supports your well-being, not just chasing some number on the scale. But his book goes even deeper, doesn't it? He talks about character traits, too.
Right. He goes into the habits that build character, the kind of stuff that leaves a legacy even after you're gone.
Yeah.
He starts with long-term thinking. Don't just think about what you accomplished today, but the impact you have in the long run.
He tells that story about Alfred Nobel, the guy who invented dynamite. He read his own obituary, basically, called himself a merchant of death, and it made him totally rethink things, so he started the Nobel Prizes to change how he'd be remembered.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that you can shape how you're remembered. And a big part of that for Tracy is honesty and integrity. He even mentions Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe. That reputation for being trustworthy, that matters.
It makes you think about what kind of values you want to live by, right? Not just for your own success, but for the people around you.
That's it. And then, for those times when things get tough, which they inevitably will, Tracy talks about persistence and determination. Those are the muscles you got to build. He actually says they're tied to self-discipline and self-esteem.
Yeah, he quotes Napoleon Hill. Persistence is to the character of man as carbon is to steel. It's a great way to put it, because it really is about building that inner strength.
And finally, Tracy emphasizes gratitude. Just taking the time to appreciate the good things in your life, even when things are tough. He believes it helps you stay positive and attract even more good stuff.
Wow, we covered a lot today. From those fundamental laws to these specific habits for all areas of life. It seems like the big takeaway is that success isn't some random thing that happens. It comes down to consistent habits and being willing to keep learning and growing.
That's it. The most important habit of all might be the habit of continuous improvement. Never stop learning. Never stop pushing yourself. Always be striving to be better.
Love that. So, listener, as we wrap up a deep dive into Brian Tracy's $1 Million Habits, here's a question for you. Which habit spoke to you the most? What can you do today to start putting these ideas into action? Remember, even small changes done consistently can lead to amazing things. Thanks for joining us.